Welcome to English Through Emotional Stories, where we learn English by walking alongside unforgettable lives. We do not just learn words here, we learn resilience, emotion, and hope through the power of storytelling. Today, we walk with Helen Keller, a child born with sight and sound, but who lost both, and then found a way to speak to the world. Her life is not only about struggle, it's about victory, not over others, but over silence itself. And through her story, we will learn English with meaning, rhythm, and soul. Let's begin. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in a small town called Tuscumbia in Alabama, USA. She was a healthy baby, bright, happy, and full of energy. Her parents named her Helen after her grandmother. They had no idea that her name would one day be known all over the world. For the first 19 months of her life, Helen lived like any other child. She smiled. She babbled. She took her first steps. She stared into her mother's eyes and reached for the light in the room. But then, something terrible happened. A sudden illness. Doctors believe it may have been scarlet fever or meningitis. One morning, Helen had a high fever and couldn't stop crying. And when the fever finally broke, the light was gone. The sounds were gone. The world around her had become completely silent and dark. Helen had gone blind and deaf before she was 2 years old. Her parents were heartbroken. But Helen didn't cry. She didn't know that anything was missing. Because how do you explain light to someone who has never seen it? How do you describe music to someone who has never heard? Helen's world was now one of shadows and silence. And yet deep inside, she was still very much alive. As Helen grew older, her frustration grew with her. She could feel things. She could smell food. She could touch people's faces and hair. But she couldn't understand why things happened, or what they meant. She couldn't speak. She couldn't read. She had no way to express the storm building inside her mind. And so, she began to act out. Helen became wild, uncontrollable. She would throw things. She would scream silently. She would kick, hit, bite, pull, break. Her parents didn't know what to do. They loved her, but they were terrified of what she was becoming. She had no discipline, no language, no light. And every day, her world grew smaller and smaller. By the age of 6, Helen had created her own system of signs. She pulled her mother to the kitchen when she wanted food. She touched her cheek when she wanted her doll. But these gestures were limited. They were not a language, just survival. Helen's intelligence was still hidden, locked behind invisible walls. And unless someone could find a way to reach her, she would remain alone, even in a world full of people. Helen's mother, Kate Keller, refused to give up. She believed her daughter was smart. She saw it in her eyes. She felt it in the way Helen searched for meaning, even in darkness. One day, she read a story about a deaf and blind woman who had learned to communicate through a special method called finger spelling. That woman had been taught by someone from a school called the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. Desperate, Kate wrote to them. She asked for help, begged for it. And the school responded with hope. They were sending someone, a young woman, barely 20 years old, blind as a child, and now partially sighted. Strong, smart, and determined. Her name was Anne Sullivan. No one knew it then, but that letter was not just an invitation. It was a rescue mission. Anne Sullivan arrived in Alabama in March of 1887. She stepped off the train, carrying very little, but what she carried inside, patience, courage, purpose, was everything. When she met Helen for the first time, the child was wild, screaming, unruly, suspicious. But Anne was not afraid. She had suffered herself. She had grown up poor, half-blind, orphaned. She had fought to learn. And now she had come to teach. But how do you teach someone who can't hear or see? You begin with touch. Anne took Helen's hand and spelled the letters WATR into her palm. Then she touched the actual water. Then spelled again, over and over. But Helen didn't understand. To Helen, those finger movements were just pressure, like wind or rain. She didn't know they meant something. She didn't know they were words. Still and persisted. For days. For weeks. Helen fought back. She broke things. She refused to listen. She pushed Anne away. But Anne stayed. She knew that behind the silence was a brilliant mind, just waiting for a key to unlock the door. And then, one day, the miracle came. It was a warm spring morning, and took Helen outside to the water pump. She placed Helen's hand under the cool stream of water. Then, she spelled WATR into Helen's other hand. Again, and again. Suddenly, something shifted. Helen stopped. She froze. Her body went still. Her face changed. Then, in a rush, she touched the ground and spelled earth. Helen touched her dress and spelled dress. It was as if a light had been turned on inside her brain. Suddenly, she realized that the motions on her hand meant words, that words meant things, and that everything had a name. In one single moment, the entire world opened to her. That day, Helen learned 30 new words, and she didn't stop. She never stopped. After that day, Helen became hungry, not for food, but for knowledge. She learned fingerspelling for everything. She learned to read Braille, raised dots she could feel with her fingertips. She learned to write using special tools. And eventually, she even learned to speak. It was difficult. She had never heard a single word, but through touch and repetition, she learned how the mouth moved. She memorized the shape of sound through vibration. She became a student, then a scholar, then a symbol. The girl who once lived in total silence was now telling the world her story. After the miracle at the water pump, Helen's hunger for knowledge was unstoppable. But learning to speak aloud, that was another mountain entirely. Helen had never heard the sound of a human voice, not even her own. How, then, could she learn to reproduce it? But she tried. She pressed her fingers against people's faces. She felt the movement of lips and tongues. She studied vibrations with her hands. And slowly, painfully, she began to form words. At first, they were unclear, but people could understand her. And that was all she needed. Many doubted her ability. Many said it was useless, that she would never speak clearly enough. But Helen Keller believed communication was a right, not a luxury, and she would fight for it, for herself and for others. Helen didn't stop at speaking. With Anne Sullivan constantly by her side, she set her next goal, a university education. And in 1900, Helen was accepted into Radcliffe College, a sister school to Harvard. There, she studied literature, philosophy, Latin, Greek, history, and mathematics. She read with her fingers. She listened through spelling into her palm. She wrote essays and exams with a typewriter. She was a deaf-blind woman in a classroom full of hearing, sighted students. But she kept pace. She asked questions. She challenged professors. In 1904, she graduated cum laude with honors. She became the first deafblind person in the world to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree, and the world began to take notice. Shortly after college, Helen wrote her first autobiography, The Story of My Life. It began as a series of articles, but it soon became a powerful, published book, read around the world. People were moved not just by her blindness and deafness, but by her intellect, her ability to express emotions, ideas, and philosophy through language. She wrote about frustration, discovery, and the pain of being misunderstood. But she also wrote about beauty. She described trees, wind, sky, not through sight or sound, but through touch, smell, movement. She showed the world that language was not tied to the eyes or ears, but to the soul. Her book became a symbol of hope. Helen Keller became a household name, but she didn't stop at storytelling. She knew her story had power, and she chose to use that power to fight for others. The world expected Helen to be an inspiration, but they didn't expect her to be political. Yet Helen Keller didn't want pity. She wanted justice. She fought for workers' rights, for women's right to vote, for people with disabilities to have access to education and independence. She joined marches. She gave speeches. She wrote articles, dozens of them, challenging inequality in all forms. She even co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. And during World War I and II, she spoke out for peace. Not always popular, not always safe, but always bold. People were surprised. Some even turned against her. They had loved the sweet, silent Helen Keller. They didn't know what to do with the loud, fearless one. But she didn't care. She said, "The welfare of each is bound up in the welfare of all." To her, silence was never an option, not anymore. Helen didn't just speak to America. She traveled to over 35 countries, meeting presidents, kings, queens, and prime ministers. She learned French, German, Latin, and even Braille and Japanese. She toured schools for the blind and deaf around the world. She advocated for education wherever she went. In Japan, children treated her like royalty. In India, she was welcomed like a saint. In South Africa, she challenged racial injustice. In England, she met Winston Churchill. In the U.S., she met every president from Grover Cleveland to Lyndon B. Johnson. But everywhere she went, she carried the same message. Blindness is not the end. Ignorance is. She believed in the power of education, in language as liberation, and in connection as the highest form of human dignity. In her later years, Helen slowed down, but only physically. She continued to write, to advise, to support causes she believed in. She lived with her companion Polly Thompson after Anne Sullivan passed away. And though her health weakened, her spirit remained strong. In 1964, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest honors in the United States. And in 1968, at the age of 87, Helen Keller passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was simple, but her legacy? Immense. Today, statues of Helen stand in schools, libraries, and museums around the world. Her books are still read, her speeches still quoted, her life still remembered, not for what she lacked, but for what she gave. Helen Keller began life in darkness and silence, but through courage, determination, and a teacher's love, she discovered language, and with it, freedom. She showed the world that communication is not limited by the body, that words can travel through hands, through books, through feeling. And most importantly, She showed that silence is not always peaceful, and that breaking it can be the most powerful thing a person can do. If you're learning English through her story, remember, every word you learn is a step toward connection. Every sentence is a light turned on. Every lesson is you saying, I want to be understood. Like Helen, you are not just learning a language. You are finding your voice, and the world needs to hear it. If you like to listen and learn English more about stories, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Please like and share with your friends who are trying to improve their English knowledge.